everyone, and welcome to our new series of videos on Microsoft Excel. You may not be familiar with Microsoft Excel because you may not have had to use it yet, and if you are familiar with it, you probably haven't gotten to know much more about it other than the fact that it uses tables. So today, we're going to give you a basic introduction, and you're going to have a chance to play around with some of the basic features. Now, we're going to start off by opening a brand new workbook. So unlike Microsoft Word, documents in Excel are called workbooks as opposed to documents. So go to your My site and you're going to create a new document and call an Excel workbook. And we're going to call this Intro Workbook. And OK. Now the reason for this, as always, is when creating any documents, if they're created right inside of your My Files location, which is an off-site OneDrive location, your documents are always automatically saved to the cloud. Now what will happen is you'll end up with the web application version of Excel. I never recommend using this. Or all the web apps in particular tend to not work very well, but I have found the Excel web app to be extremely buggy, and when you're using functions and equations and that sort of thing, you just don't want to have any issues. So always remember to hit open in Excel. You may come up with some form of warning or what have you. You're always just going to click yes. I have to log in because I am off-site right now, working from my home computer. And you'll also need to hit Enable Editing. And the reason for this is that Excel files can be embedded with viruses and other pieces of actual software, executable software. So in the past, Excel documents have been known to be used to propagate viruses and Trojans amongst businesses. So you want to be careful when you're opening a workbook that is sent to you by somebody else, that you know exactly what you're opening and what you're editing before you hit Enable Edit. Up until that point, it's basically sitting in a sandbox where it can't hurt you most of the time. So we'll hit Enable Editing. And then once again we'll hit Enable or Edit Workbook, and the reason why we have to do this extra step is simply because we are using a cloud version of the file, so Excel asks us to take this one extra step in order to make anything happen. Under certain circumstances, you may be able to start editing. You'll see yourself typing and that sort of thing, but it will not save until that Edit Workbook button is hit. So anyways, here we go. You should have something that looks very, very similar to this. Of course, I am working in Excel 2016 and you are working in Excel 2013. So you'll see something slightly different than what I have, but for the most part, very, very similar. You'll notice up here some familiar tabs and this whole general chunk of screen called the ribbon. So this is a continuous workflow is what we would call it, that is common to all Microsoft Office software, and there's a definite reason for that. Once you get comfortable using the ribbon in one set of software, you should be able to look for similar things between each program. So on the Home tab, you'll find familiar things like the clipboard, your fonts, your alignment, which is partially the same but not exactly identical, because alignment, we're not talking about paragraphs anymore, we're talking about cells, so much simpler alignment options. And then you get all this formatting stuff for cells, and eventually we'll get into that sort of stuff, but this is sort of the equivalent of your title text and headings and all that good stuff we've been using in Microsoft Word. This is sort of formatting cells to function in special ways, just the same way that your headings do. There's also some quick insert and delete cell functions, because we are working always with tables, so we have access to them as well, and some editing and sorting functions. Under the Insert tab, we have all of the tools that you would, again, as I've always said, if you thought to yourself, I want to insert something like a text box, you will find text boxes. There are charts and pivot tables and that sort of thing. I don't want you to worry about that right now. Charts and pivot tables are enormously useful, and we will certainly use them, but we'll get to that when we're ready. The page layout or layout tab, depending on what it looks like, what it's called for you, it looks very simple compared to our usual page layout tab, but that's simply because you have less control over what your end document looks like through what we would call macro controls or gross large controls. You're fine tuning through your actual cells. The review tab also exists where we get our spelling and thesaurus. One thing you have to be really careful with Excel is it's not very good at doing any spell checking at all, and that's simply because usually when you're working in a table, you could be entering sort of weird letters and functions and that sort of thing, and it's not going to check your spelling. See, there's no little red squiggly underline to highlight the fact that I've entered in some complete gibberish, but the reality is most of the time when you're entering stuff into tables, you're not going to, I shouldn't say most of the time, when you're entering things into tables, you will not always be entering full sentences, words, and so on. Sometimes you will, but not always. And then we have the View tab, which very similar again in function. You've got like grid lines and that sort of thing, but you notice you have no options there for a ruler in the normal sense. The grid lines can be hidden if you wish, if you're a bit of a masochist and you don't mind not being able to see anything properly. But anyways, we'll talk a little bit about this, a little more about this later. Starting from, I'm going to go back to home. There are some new tabs, though, that you haven't seen before. One of them is the Formulas tab. One of Excel's primary functions that makes it enormously powerful is the fact that it can do complex mathematical equations and logic-based argument summation. And so basically what that all means is that it's really, really good at following instructions. But that means that you need to use instructions, and so I could say, for example, let's say I just enter in, I'm going to just enter in a string of numbers. I'm going to show you a very, very simple function, which we'll talk about functions a little bit later. But if I wanted to add up all the numbers in these cells, I would use a function that starts with equals, and I'd call it sum because I want to add all the numbers in it. And I highlight all of them, I close the bracket, and hit enter, and bingo bango, I've got myself a number. So you see the cell here shows number, but the function shows up here. If I change one of the numbers in the equation, the end result changes. So Excel, this is a very, very, very basic formula within Excel, and Excel has just huge quantities of really complex and cool stuff that it can do. But this tab will help you by giving you access to some common functions and mathematic functions, and basically reference materials to figuring out how you want to type your logic equations. Anyway, so formulas, and that's sort of down the line. We're definitely going to be looking at that because it is one of the most powerful functions of a spreadsheet software like Excel. You also have the Data tab. Won't be using this one too much, but you do get the sort functions. Sorting and filtering data is one of the strong suits of using a digital spreadsheet, where you can arrange all of your, say, a list of donors. You could have last name, first name, and all the donations that they made, and all the dates. You could choose to sort it by the date they made their donation on, or who donated the least or the most. You can use the sorts and filters in order to do that. So there's your basic overview. Now, in terms of functions that are also the same as Microsoft Word, the zoom function definitely works. So if you hit Control, which is what I'm doing right now, and you scroll up, you will zoom in and zoom out if you scroll down. Okay, very useful tool, something you'll probably be doing quite often because it'll start to go buggy if you're trying, your eyes will start to go buggy if you're trying to view lots of little cells. You can also, of course, use the slider, which exists across all Microsoft Office applications. And then down here, there are some familiar buttons that don't exactly work the same way. So we are in normal view. You'll recall in Microsoft Word that normal view sketched out a page for us. We had this nice page and it had all the margins on it, and it's pretty much how it would look when it printed out, just at whatever zoom level you picked. When you're working with a spreadsheet, you're often not concerned with how it's going to look on a page because that's not its intended function. You may have to do that later, but for now, that's not what you're worried about. So a spreadsheet will always default to how many cells, because I just zoomed all the way out, how many cells can we fit on screen at the current zoom level? How much data can we make visible? And that's all about function, not aesthetic. If you are really concerned with how your page will look, you can hit Page Layout, and now you'll see that you end up with an actual page design. So you can see my margin on the left is larger than my margin on the right, and that largely has to do with the size of my cells. If I shrink my cell, if it can fit one more within the margins of my page, it will do so. You can have a header, which is kind of like a title that'll appear on all of your pages, exactly the same as headers and footers in Microsoft Word. Just a little simpler, a little less about aesthetics and more about function. So less about how it looks and more about how it works. You can also hit the page break view. Now, page break view right now shows blank. There's nothing there, and that's because all these cells are empty. The page break view is basically showing you where all of your pages will start and finish relative to your cells. So if you have a whole bunch of data going across to the right hand side, you might need multiple sheets of paper to fit all of your cells. It'll show you all of your data and where those pages will end. When I go back to normal, though, you'll see that there's this dotted line here after cell I, and what that's telling me, because I went into page break view, it's telling me that these cells all currently fit within the view of one printable page, going down to this dotted line here. So if I expand one cell, it may push some right off the page. So now H and I are no longer on the page. You can also turn that function on in the Zoom tab. These buttons down here are also available in the View tab, right at the top left. So now that we've got our workbook open, you're welcome to go into these views if you want to have the dotted lines show up. That's up to you. But let's work from this whole view where we can see all of our cells. Now, I mentioned earlier that we don't call an Excel file a document, and that's because it's less of a document and it's more of a book, which is to say that it can have lots of different pages, because you're not just going to throw a whole bunch of data wherever you want it on a page. You have pages that are dedicated to things. So you'll see down here it says Sheet 1. So this is a whole book, and currently I have one work document in that workbook. So my sheet can spread over multiple pages of paper, right? Again, that's a distinction that we're making here, that this is going to be a single sheet or a single document within my workbook, even though it takes up multiple pieces of paper. But its function is uniform. It is one single document. Now you can have more than one sheet. You can have many, many sheets, in fact. So if you click down here, there's a little new sheet button. We get sheet 2 that pops up. Okay, let's do it again. So now we've got 3 sheets. Now these tabs will gradually, depending on your screen resolution, will get occluded over time. You'll end up with a little drop-down arrow that pops up all the list of sheets. It can be quite useful if you have a primary document that you would like to make it more visible. So if you right-click on the sheet name, you can choose to rename it, you can choose to delete, blah, 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 but you can also change the tab's color. So this is kind of like a highlight. It makes it easier to find visually. So now you can see that that one tab has its own color associated with it. So we can change this one. Let's do it to orange. Oops, and this one we'll change it to yellow. So now not only do we have a differentiated name, but we have a differentiated color. Doesn't change the worksheet itself. This just basic little properties make our workflow a little bit easier to function in. You can all, and actually before I go on, speaking of making our workflow easier to function in, when you're entering data and you need to see as many cells at once, it can be really annoying to have this ribbon here. And just like in Word, when you kind of get on a roll and you're typing lots of stuff and you don't want to be interrupted by losing space, you want to see as much as possible, you may want to hide the ribbon. So you can hide the ribbon by double-clicking on the current tab that you're in, which puts it away, and then when I click on that tab once, the ribbon pops back up. Now it'll auto-hide again as soon as I leave that. I personally don't really like the auto-hide function. I'm in the ribbon most of the time, so I can double click on a tab again and it will open that ribbon permanently. Alternatively, the hotkey for that is Control F1. So Control F1 will hide and bring back that ribbon all over again. So we've got our workbook. We've titled it Intro Workbook. We are going to also change the name of our sheets. Sheet 1, 2, and 3 is not really anything easy to remember, so we'll right click, hit rename. We'll call this one 2015, hit enter. Rename 2016. Rename 2017. There we go. So now we've got our 3 one-year books. You can move these around if you want. These are very much you can drag and drop them. Sometimes if I'm working on just like 2 or 3 specific worksheets and there's lots of reasons why you have a whole ton of them and you're only working from a few of them and you're doing it all at the same time, you can drag them into different orders so that you're able to just click between those rapidly. You can also hide tabs that you don't want. So let's say, for example, this is the master sheet that you're working from. You need this data that's on here, but you don't ever really want to edit it. So you can do 2 things, and it could be one or both. You can right-click and go Protect Sheet, and if you do that, it allows you to protect either in specific data, like you can select cells, you can select unlock cells. You can basically, it gives you lots and lots of tools. But essentially what you can do is you can put a password on this little worksheet, and that basically stops anybody else from editing it. It also stops you from accidentally editing it because it's going to pop up with a little password request and you go, oh yeah, crap, I shouldn't be working in this one. So we'll just hit cancel there. The other thing you can do, which is quite a little bit simpler, is you can hide a tab. So before we hide a tab, let's say we want to work on just 2017, but not only that, I want 2017 to be its own workbook. So maybe this is where I keep all my finances, and 2015, 2016, 2017, these are just copies of my final expenses, making my life easier for viewing. But what I want to have a workbook for 2017. So I'm going to go and create, we're going to hit the move or copy button. And the move or copy button gives us a couple options. You can choose where you want your new sheet to end up. You can even choose if you don't want it in this book at all. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new version of 2017. We're going to stick it after the existing version of 2017, and we're saying create a copy. Okay, so we want to have 2 versions of this worksheet. And I'll show you why in a second. So hit 2017, and you can see 2017 in number 2 in brackets shows up. So now that I've created this copy, and you can see that it's also yellow, we'll go back to move or copy, and we're going to go new workbook. So this is going to create a brand new workbook from this. Now here's the thing, if I select create a copy, both of these will stay here. But with create a copy being deselected, what it's going to do is it's going to grab this worksheet, create a new workbook, and delete this one for me. So we'll go OK, get a new workbook, and wham bam, thank you ma'am, we have ourselves a brand new book. And it's titled Default Book 1. You can File, save as, create a new, save it as a new document, but you'll see the tab is down here, titled the same way. We'll go back to our intro workbook, and you can see it's been deleted from down here. So now that we've created a new one, we can assume that this one is probably going to be blank. We haven't worked on our finances at all, so maybe I'll just hide it. And it's like it doesn't even exist. That way you're not accidentally flipping through it. You can do this too if you've got, we'll talk about referencing later, where you have a whole bunch of data in one spreadsheet and you reference it to other spreadsheets. Sometimes you just don't want it visible, so you hide it so it doesn't accidentally get edited, or just because it's in the way and frankly you just don't need it there. If you ever need to unhide, just click on one of your workbooks, or worksheets I should say, and click unhide. And it'll give you an option of all hidden sheets. Click the one that you want, and there you go. So you can save your new book as workbook 2, or sorry, not workbook 2, we want intro workbook 2. Save that to your My Site, and that is your introduction assignment. Thanks very much. See you next time.